Welcome to this episode of Locked In. In this episode, I'm doing my DIY backyard paint job on my Pateron Redwood. If you want to paint your bike yourself and all you have is some spray cans and some outsided area, this video is for you. I'm going to give you my tips and tricks on what I'm going to be using for painting this bike, again, in a DIY paint job. I have an idea of what I want to do with this paint scheme, but I'm just going to be kind of winging it, so I hope you enjoy this journey with me. So first off, before I get started, there are a few things that I'm going to be mentioning in the video of what I'm using, but there are going to be a lot of scenarios where my materials that I need for this specific paint job may be different for you based on the condition of your frame. So keep that in mind. This Pateron Redwood has a good amount of miles on it. It has some wear, it has some chips, but nothing really drastic in the paint, and the paint's pretty thin in general, so I don't suspect needing to body work it a ton. So you could definitely, no matter what frame you have, you can sand it down, you can chemically strip it depending on the material that it is. In this video, I'm going to be literally just scuffing it down with some sandpaper, but you could use a gray Scotch-Brite as well. So if your frame's in pretty good shape, you really just need to basically knock down the surface to get a good adhesion for the paint you're going to be doing. I'm doing a black base coat to coat the entire frame, then doing kind of my random crazy splatter fade kind of upper level of the paint job, and then tidying it up with the black, and then adding some fender liner or undercoating to a few key components on the bike to keep this thing really rugged and looking new. So let's get started. Obviously, this bike is dirty and ridden, so I'm going to be taking this thing all the way down to just the frame and fork, and then cleaning it up, and then starting the paint job. So now I've taken the bike completely apart and taken everything off of it. The last two things I need to take off of here are some stickers that I have on the frame, because obviously anything on the frame like that you want to peel off. So if you don't have all the tools to take everything apart on your bike, or you really just don't care to take it all the way down, you can simply watch my how to do a splatter paint video after this one, and that shows you basically how I essentially did a paint job in about 3 hours, and all I did was kind of mask up all the lines and everything. Obviously this way is going to get you a better end result, but honestly that bike came out really well for not taking it fully apart. So that's something you can definitely do. The other tip that I have when you're taking your bike apart, if you've never done it, is make sure to put all your bolts and everything together. Put your bolts back in your derailleur hangers, any other place that you can in the frame. So now I'm just going to scuff this down. Again, depending on the condition of your bike, the grit that you're going to want to use is going to be different. You can chemically strip the bike down, but you do have to get that perfect. So if your paint job is in pretty good use, actually sanding can save you some time over chemical stripping. So what I'm going to be doing is simply scuffing this thing up with about 400 grit. And again, just making sure the surface is uniform. Now, any areas that are problematic or you have chips in, you need to feather that out so that it's nice and smooth to the touch. Use your hand more so than your eye, because the smoother that is, the better the paint's gonna lay down. Obviously, like I've said in all my videos, prep is the most important part of any paint job. The better the prep is, the better the paint job's gonna be. So now let's scuff this down, including the fork. Then we're gonna go over how to mask up the bike and a few tips and tricks on how to keep paint out of your thread holes. All right, so I have the frame completely sanded down. Now this, again, is where I'm gonna tell you more prep time, and the more time you spend on this preparation of your bike, no matter what material it is, the better the outcome's gonna be. Now this is gonna be my kind of 90s mountain bike. If you haven't seen that series, please make sure to subscribe and watch that after this video. But basically, I know that this bike's gonna be pretty beat up, and I'm gonna be putting fender liner on a lot of the high impact areas, so I'm not super concerned about it being perfect. But if this is a showpiece for you, obviously you want to basically go through the entire frame as you've seen me work through and sand everything down. Periodically I like to wet down the frame so that you're able to see if there are shiny spots anywhere on it. After it completely dries back out, you're going to see any dull versus shiny spots, which means the shiny areas where you're going to need to add some more sand time in and clean that up. So obviously you want to make sure to go through all the welds and the tight areas. The more time you spend on those areas, the better they're going to be, and those are usually the most pain in the butt to do, but it is really crucial when working on a bike. That's where you saw me use this sanding sponge. Pick up a few of these. This is definitely a game changer for, again, the hard to reach areas, especially like the bottom bracket where you saw me use this. This is really going to get in there and kind of fold around some of those edges to get you a nice clean surface. And you can see that I use this with the sandpaper wrapped around it for the fork, so you can use it basically as a sanding block, but because it does bend and does conform, it's a lot better for your bike because it's going to basically hug the curvature of whatever surface you're working on. So these are definitely a worthwhile pickup. And again, depending on your frame and how rugged it is, it depends on the sandpaper you're going to be needing. I would say start with 400 grit and go up to maybe a 600 or an 800 if you need it. And as far as for this frame, I use just 400 grit and that sanding block. You don't really need to go much higher than that if you're doing a good base coat, which is obviously going to fill in any micro scratches. But I would say if you're worried about that or it feels too rough to you, or if you do a test spray out on the bike, use some 600 or 800 before putting your base down. Now for me, because it does have mostly paint still on the bike, I'm just going to lay down some trim black as my base coat, since I'm not priming the bike, since it's basically the paint's going to bite into the paint that's already on there. If it was completely down to the bare material, I would then probably prime it. But in this scenario, I don't have to. Now we're going to be masking up all the areas on the bike that need to be masked, as well as wiping the bike down when it's done to thoroughly clean it before laying down our black base. So the main areas you're going to want to mask up, for me, I'm going to mask up my entire seat area here because I'm going to be leaving that on the bike because I want to spray the bike in the stand. You can bag the stand if you're worried about getting overspray on it. Then as far as the bike goes, you're going to want to tape up your threaded area for your bottom bracket. If it's not threaded, just tape up the bottom bracket anyway. And then what I'm going to be doing is putting the stock hardware back in all these holes about halfway through. If I was going to be reusing the hardware, I would basically mask off or tape just the top of the bolts so that I keep them clean, because obviously any paint that gets on them is initially going to get chipped off, and leaving them in there is going to keep the threads nice and clean so that you don't have any issues with threading your bolts back in after your paint job. The other areas that you want to mask up are typically around your derailleur hanger area and your braking surfaces for your disc brakes. Now, I'm not going to be doing that until I lay down the black base because obviously I don't want to leave the green there. So I'm going to spray the whole thing, get the base coat down, then mask up those areas before doing the color and clear coat so I don't build up too much material in those critical areas. Wipe this thing up and mask it up. So as you can see, you want to wipe the bike down and completely clean it. You basically want to get all the dust and debris off it. I highly recommend using microfiber rags because they pick up every inch of residue, and I know my rags look dirty, but they're actually just been washed. They are just stained from using them on my bike. But I highly recommend getting some microfibers, and you can just use a little bit of dish soap and some warm water to clean the bike down. Again, thoroughly cleaning it. If you see any dirt on it or touch it with your hand, and a little hack, you can actually just throw one of these rags or a dirty one that you have into the bottom bracket, stuff it nice and complete so that you cover all the threads. Makes it really easy instead of trying to have to tape around the threads because the tape never really wants to stick very well. So now we have the bike completely wiped down, again using microfibers, making sure to get all the dust and debris off. Obviously painting outside is not ideal. A closed environment or something with a roof on it is going to be best, but again, I want to show you how you can do this in the backyard and get the best results possible. So for my base coat and my base color of black, I'm going to be using this trim black. I really recommend this stuff. You can find it at most of your local hardware stores. It does seem to stick and lay down pretty well. Now, any paint that you use or for whatever color, you want to make sure to read the can to see what the recommended time is for initially shaking the can, as well as how many coats it recommends and the time frame between, keeping in mind with the temperature that it's outside. Right now it's about 75 or so, so it's a really ideal painting weather. It's not too hot and not too cold. So I'm going to be shaking this up and doing about 3 coats of black. Then I'm going to let this sit overnight and start my color process tomorrow. That's going to allow this paint to fully cure and adhere the best it's possibly going to before adding an additional color on top and then eventually a clear coat. So what I always recommend is light, even coats. You want to make sure to spray the can nice and even and finish your spray after you've finished with the tube. So on the tube, off the tube, on the tube, off the tube. You don't want to stop or just go back and forth really, really quick. That's going to add a lot of buildup and potentially get drips. The lighter coats, the less likely you're going to have that, and just do more of them. So I'm hoping to get good coverage in about 3 coats, and then we're going to have to sit and wait and pick up with the color. So let's get started. And you want to be sure to walk all the way around the bike to make sure you get all the nooks and crannies and go up and underneath the bike as well. All right, so as you can see here, the bike is now black base coated. So this is gonna be where I'm gonna let the bike sit overnight. Now, ideally this would be in a garage. Obviously you wanna paint in a well-vented area, but I don't have a garage where I live currently. It's gonna have to sit on the patio because I'm not gonna be huffing fumes all night. So what I'm gonna be doing is taking some plastic and gonna be overhanging it over the bike so that nothing, hopefully dust-wise or dew, if there is any, settles into the paint overnight. This is, again, not ideal. If you can have this covered, it's gonna be your best case scenario, or again, put it in a garage somewhere where obviously the fumes from it aren't gonna bother anyone. So the overall outcome of this has been pretty clean. Between coats, I did kind of blow off some dust or anything that settled on the frame, do what you can. But again, doing a backyard paint job, there is gonna be potential contaminants into the paint, but we're trying to do the best we can. And as far as dry times go, you don't have to necessarily let it sit overnight. I like doing this for the base coat only because I am going to be backmasking this for a future part of this paint job. And I really wanted this base coat to stick really, really well. But depending on the temperature and your conditions, just consult your spray can and see what the actual full cure time is. In this scenario, if let's say you didn't have full coverage, what you're going to want to do is clean the frame down again with your clean microfiber rag, and then basically fill in any areas that are dry or need extra color, then let that cure again before continuing on. As far as the final finish on this, honestly, it looks pretty good. There's a few little areas that got a little rough. It feels like I'll have a little bit of dirt in here. If I really wanted this to be perfectly smooth, I'd probably hit this with some 800 grit, sand it back, smooth it out, then clean it, and then thoroughly coat the fork again and letting that cure. So if you have any paint runs or any damage, you can basically sand it back and then fill it back in and feather it back, let your paint cure fully depending on what your paint can says, and then continue forward. I'm going to be changing my shirt because last time I did a splatter paint job I totally ruined the shirt I was in, and I don't want to ruin my Slow But Look Pro t-shirt, obviously. You're going to be watching me do this kind of ornately. That's the rough idea I have. I'm just going to keep adding and subtracting different colors to see what I really want in the end result. This is honestly up to you, and you can interpret this paint scheme in your own way. If you wanted just a flat black, you could basically end it here and then skip to where I start clear coating, but this is an idea of just to wing it, and again, you can just simply sand it back down and start all over if you actually end up not liking it. So I'm simply going to install the headset and zip tie it so that this fork is going to stay on the frame. Usually I would paint them separate, but because of that line that I want to keep consistent on the bike, I want to have the fork installed so everything lines up pretty well, and why I did my base coat the way I did. But obviously if you're just doing a single color or something you can mask off prior, you can obviously paint these separate, which will be better in the end result, to be honest. All right, well, as you can see, I just kind of winged it. And so what I basically did is, if you're watching this footage now, is I basically kind of dusted the frame all around with the different 3 colors that I used. These were all Rust-Oleum cans, and if you've ever painted with Rust-Oleum, it does take a lot longer to dry. So I'm gonna let this sit for quite a while before I clear coat it. It's early enough in the day, and that's why I did this about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The weather's nice, it's warm, so hopefully in a few hours I'll be able to lay down some clear coat. Now, realistically, this is a very ornate paint job, so I can go in and dust more if I want to. Obviously, I'm going to leave up the plastic sheeting in case I want to add anything, but just constantly move around and see what you come up with. I was going to kind of come back and try to make this a harder edge line, but now that I see it with the extra splatter kind of around, I really do like it, and I might tweak it a little bit, but I think this is basically it. I just kept going until it felt right, I guess is the best way to put it. You can use different techniques to splatter paint on. I basically just shot a bunch in a cut cup, as you saw, and just chucked it on. Different amounts of paint, so you get these big globs and then little splatter all over the place, and just kept adding as I went. And again, you can keep going to your heart's content and fix anything that you want. Comment below if you like this. I'm gonna call this like a splatter galaxy paint job with a fade. I don't know. There's so many things that are going on in this. So I hope you guys like it as much as I do. And it's really hard to tell on camera, but I'm doing my best to show it off. These colors really do pop. Again, what you would do in this scenario is let it completely cure once it's done. So lastly, when you are doing splatter, keep in mind that, depending on how thick and heavy the drips are, you may actually have some kind of surface to this or texture, or it might have a raised section where the drips are if you go really heavy with it. So keep that in mind. It's not going to be perfectly smooth potentially. The clear coat, the more you add to it, it is obviously going to fill that in, but I really want this to dry fully so that everything kind of lays down and flattens as much as I'd like, and then see how the colors look and see if it changes at all before I do, again, the final clear coat, which you'll be seeing next. So the same process is going to happen as you see me clear coating the bike now. It's just light, even coats like you did with your base coat, making sure to fully wipe down the frame once it is fully cured before spraying the clear coat so that there's no contaminants in it. And you want to do 2 to 4 coats of clear. Look at the can that you're using. It's going to recommend how heavy to do the coats and how many to do, making sure to give it enough rest time and flash time between each coat. Now, since we are doing a backyard paint job, there's potential that your clear coat is still going to be a little rough after you've done spraying your recommended coats that are going to be on the can. Now, if you do have that and you want that silky smooth gloss finish, what you're going to have to do is wet sand the frame with 1500 grit sandpaper. What that's going to do is going to level off any dirt or contaminants in the top layer. Then you're going to simply clear coat 1 to 2 more coats and then rinse and repeat that process a few times if you need to. Now, you don't want to obviously keep doing that forever and build up a ton of paint, but that's what you're going to want to do if you want a smoother finish on your bike if it doesn't come out perfectly the first time. So now that you've done your clear coat, you want to let it fully cure for 24 hours if you're done with this paint job. Now, obviously, like I mentioned, I'm going to be adding some rubberized coating onto my bike, but if you're not planning on doing that, you can simply protect your frame with some 3M tape. And I do have a video in the description below that'll show you how to simply protect your bike using that and how I've done it and basically do it to all my bikes. Now with this bike, using the rubberized coating, I'm probably still gonna add some 3M clear tape to certain areas of the bike since this is gonna be my bike packing bike and I will be strapping bags to it and those will eventually wear out the paint on my frame. So you simply wanna let this cure for a full 24 hours before you plan on rebuilding your bike or putting it back together. I'd give it a full 48 before taking it on any dirt trails. If you're riding on road, that should be fine. You just don't want to introduce any dirt or debris that can maybe embed itself into the paint while it's still fully curing. So that's why I say to give it that 48 hours before you take it on any serious rides. Now I'm gonna backmask this frame so I can basically protect this paint job and only put that rubberized coating exactly where I want it, and then we're all done. All right, so we're all wrapped up, and I have to say that stuff is definitely very, very messy. So if you're gonna be rubber coating your bike, make sure to thoroughly mask it like you saw me do. You definitely want to, because that stuff is literally gonna get everywhere. And make sure to mask up what's around you as well. This stuff shoots really, really far. And basically the only tips I can definitely say for this is you wanna mask a very clean line, and you want to shoot that stuff at a real far distance if you want a real nice light texturing on it, because if you just get it real close, it's just going to gum up and kind of look melty, I guess is the best way to put it. So if you want a real nice texture like I got, you kind of want to dust it like you saw me do, just adding where you need to. Man, that stuff is really crazy, and I'll be updating how this ends up being as a protective coating later down the line. I would definitely right now be showing you a reveal video of how the bike looks complete, but you're gonna have to subscribe and turn notifications on so you can see the next part of my gravel bike into a 90s mountain bike series. I am waiting on some parts that should be here any day now to update a few things that are on this bike, so I can't fully show you what it's gonna look like. You're gonna have to stay tuned. So I hope you like this video. If you have any questions, please make sure to comment in the comments below. I'll be adding another playlist of all my paint videos for all the different styles of paint that I've done over the years, from literally stripping a frame down bare to doing splatter and a fade paint job. So if you're interested in seeing any of those, make sure to check the playlist below. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram, as well as you can support the channel and pick up one of these Slow But Look Pro or Is My Bike Okay t-shirts and other merch that I have on my Spreadshirt store, as well as you can support Locked In via Patreon, where I do offer one-on-one cycling consultations at my top 2 tier levels. And lastly, thanks for watching another episode of Locked In.
Let's get locked in today.